Chapter 45 of Adapted Night by Elie Wiesel. "Father, are you there?" I asked as soon as I was able to speak. I knew that he could not be far away. "Yes," a voice replied from far away, as if from another world. "I'm trying to sleep." He was trying to sleep, but I knew this was a bad idea. It was wrong to sleep when death could come at any moment. Those were my thoughts when I heard the sound of a violin. A violin in a dark building where the dead were lying on top of the living? Who was this crazy man who played the violin here, or was it a dream? He was playing Beethoven. Never before had I heard such a beautiful sound. In such silence, all I could hear was the violin, and it was as if the man's soul had become his music. He was playing his life and his hopes that he would never live to see, his dead past and his sad future. He played as if he would never play again. I soon fell asleep. When I awoke, I saw the man with the violin laying on the ground, dead. Next to him was his violin, broken. Chapter 46. We stayed in the empty village for 3 days without food or water. We were prohibited from leaving the building. The door was guarded by the SS. I was hungry and thirsty. I must have been very dirty. The bread we had brought had been eaten long ago, and who knew when we would be given more food? The Red Army was following us to try to save us. We heard gunshots very close from the Russians fighting the Nazis, but we no longer had the strength or the courage to think that we would be saved. We learned that we would be moved again. On the 3rd day at sunrise we left. We threw blankets over our shoulders. We were directed to a gate that divided the camp in two. A group of SS officers stood waiting. They called, "Selection!" The SS officers were doing the selection, the weak to the left, those who were healthy to the right. My father was sent to the left. I ran after him. An SS officer shouted at my back, "Come back!" Several SS men ran over to find me in the crowd of people, creating such confusion that some were able to switch over to the right. My father and I somehow escaped to the right too. Still there were gunshots and some dead. We left the camp. After a half-hour march, we arrived at train tracks. This was where we were to wait for the train's arrival. Snow was falling heavily. We were prohibited from sitting down or moving. Thick snow covered our blankets. We were given some bread. We threw ourselves on it. Someone had the idea of eating snow. Soon we were all eating it, a mouthful of bread and a spoonful of snow. The SS men who were watching were laughing at us. Finally, a long train of closed cattle cars arrived. The SS pushed us inside, 100 people per car. We were so skinny. When everybody was on, we left. Chapter 47. Pressed against one another, trying to stay warm, our heads empty and heavy, our brains full of dying memories. Here or elsewhere, what did it matter? Die today or tomorrow or later? The night was growing longer, never ending. My father was near me, covered by his blanket, shoulders covered with snow. And what if he were dead too? I yelled to him. No response. I would have screamed if I could have. He was not moving. Suddenly the evidence made me angry. There was no longer any reason to live, any reason to fight. The train stopped in an empty field. Outside, the SS walked by shouting, "Throw out all the dead! Outside, all the bodies!" The men who were still alive were happy. They would have more room. Volunteers began to throw the bodies out of the train. "Here's one! Take him!" 2 men tried to take my father. I threw myself on top of his body. He was cold. I slapped him. I rubbed his hands, crying, "Father, father, wake up! They're gonna throw you outside!" His body did not move. The 2 men took me by the neck. "Leave him alone! Can't you see that he's dead?" "No!" I yelled. "He's not dead! Not yet!" I started to hit him harder and harder. At last my father half opened his eyes. They were like glass. He was breathing softly. "You see?" I cried. The 2 men went away. 20 bodies were thrown from the train. Then the train began to move again, leaving in a snowy field in Poland. Hundreds of naked corpses without a tomb. Chapter 48. We received no food. We lived on snow. It took the place of bread. It never stopped snowing. We stayed on the floor for days and nights, one on top of the other, never saying a word. We were nothing but frozen bodies. We traveled for many days and nights. Occasionally we would pass through German towns. usually very early in the morning. German workers were going to their jobs. They would stop and look at us without surprise. One day when we were stopped, a worker took a piece of bread out of his bag and threw it into the train. The prisoners were fighting desperately over the small piece of bread. The worker watched with great interest. In the train where the man threw the bread, a war began. Like animals, men were throwing themselves on each other, hitting and scratching each other. A crowd of German people formed next to the train. They had never seen a train like this. Soon pieces of bread were falling into the train from all sides, and the German people watched these dying animals ready to kill for a piece of bread. A piece fell into our train. I decided not to move. I knew that I would not be strong enough to fight off dozens of violent men. I saw an old man crawling away from the group of fighting prisoners. He was holding one hand to his heart. At first I thought he had injured his heart, but then I understood. He was hiding a piece of bread under his shirt. With great speed, he pulled it out and put it to his mouth. He began to smile. Suddenly someone started hitting him. Surprised, the old man was crying, "Son, my little son, don't you know me? You're killing your father. I have bread for you too." He fell to the ground, but his hand was still holding a small piece of bread. He wanted to eat it, but another man threw his body on the old man. The old man made a sound and died. Nobody cared. His son searched him, took the piece of bread, and began to eat it. He didn't get far. 2 men were watching him. They jumped on top of him. Others joined in. When they stopped, there were 2 dead bodies next to me. The father and the son. I was 16. Chapter 49. In our train there was a friend of my father's, Mr. Katz. He had worked as a gardener in the concentration camp before we left, and had brought us some green vegetables. Because he was stronger than most of us, he had been put in charge of our train. On the 3rd night of our journey, I woke up when I felt 2 hands on my throat trying to kill me. I barely had time to yell, "Father!" Just that one word. The man was killing me. But my father woke up and grabbed him. Too weak to stop him, he yelled to Mr. Katz, come quickly, someone is killing my son." In a few seconds I was free. I never did find out why this stranger wanted to kill me. On the last day of our journey, a terrible wind began to blow. The snow kept falling. We knew that the end was near, the real end. We could not live long in this storm. Somebody got up and yelled, "We can't keep sitting, we will freeze to death. Let's get up and move." We all got up. We pulled our wet, cold blankets around our shoulders, and we tried to take a few steps to shuffle back and forth in place. Suddenly, someone started crying like a sick animal. Someone had just died. Others, close to death, also cried. Their cries seemed to come from death. Soon everybody was crying, moaning, cries of sadness in the wind and the snow. The sadness spread from train car to train car. It was contagious. And now hundreds of cries began at once. The death sound of an entire train with the end near. Nobody had any strength left, and the night seemed endless. "Why don't they just shoot us now?" someone yelled. That same night we reached our destination. It was late. The guards came to get us out of the train, but the dead were left in the train. Only those who could stand could leave. The last day had been the worst. There were 100 men in the train car when we started. 12 of us survived. Among them, my father and myself. We had arrived in Buchenwald, our last concentration camp.